Welcome to Will Speaks History, a breath of fresh air for my channel. I'm going to be making history, educational videos on many subjects in history. As the first series on the channel, I'm going to cover the life of Adolf Hitler, so make sure you subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss out when I upload the other parts of the life of Adolf Hitler. Thank you for listening, and enjoy. Adolf Hitler, the most notorious dictator in history. His name is known in some margin by everyone. He was the Führer of Nazi Germany from 1934 to 1945. And in this series I will cover everything from the formation of the German Empire in 1871 to Hitler's suicide in 1945. I will be using a rough timeline I made to structure this series, and this first episode will be set around the following subjects: German Unification in 1871, Hitler's family, and World War I. If you would like to skip ahead to see certain subjects, look for the timestamps in the description below. Let's begin. Germany as a nation, or united group, can be found as far back as the year 800, when the Holy Roman Empire was formed, with Charles I, or Charlemagne, being coronated as the emperor. The empire was more German than Roman, and was more of a large cluster of states with many ethnicities under an emperor's rule. It lasted until 1806, when Napoleon, yes, that Napoleon, invaded and redrew the map of Europe. Napoleon's defeat at the hands of the Sixth Coalition allowed for many German states to achieve independence or self-governing abilities. The Seventh Coalition was formed in order to counter, can you guess who? Napoleon, again. They defeated him, a new map of Europe was drawn up. The German Confederation was created to replace the Holy Roman Empire, and was an association of nearly 40 German-speaking states, created by the Congress of Vienna in 1815. It contained most of, but not all of, the Kingdom of Prussia. Remember them, they are going to be very important later on. And it also included the areas of ethnic German majority in the Austrian Empire. The German Confederation stayed around for several years until King Wilhelm I died and Otto von Bismarck was appointed the Prime Minister of Prussia. Bismarck had a different idea for Germany. Not a united region of German-speaking states that had a similar liberal idea. No, he wanted a Germany based on military force. In 1864, the joint Prussian-Austrian army advanced into Denmark, following a few complications revolving around the 1852 Treaty of London. I will get into that in a different video. The end of the conflict saw both Austria and Prussia gain Danish lands, Schleswig and Holstein. By the next year, however, Bismarck was wanting Austrian lands that he believed belonged to Prussia, and his plans. He wanted to keep the moral high ground in order to continue his absorption, we'll call it, of different states around the Confederation. He formed an alliance with the Italians and began to provoke the Austrian border. Great ally there. Bismarck then proposed a unified German Empire without Austria. A meeting was held to discuss the issues with the Schleswig-Holstein, and Bismarck announced the dissolution of the German Confederation. He began a war with Austria and the southern German states. The Italians joined the conflict and the fighting began. Prussia and Italy won the war against Austria, which had lasted just 7 weeks. At the peace agreements, Prussia seized the Austrian territories outside of their main empire, and the Italians seized Venice and surrounding territories. Italy was later unified in 1870, but that's for a later series. Prussia formed the North German Confederation in 1867, and was now only one enemy from their united German Empire. One enemy that so far had not intervened in any of Bismarck's plans: the French. Bismarck needed the France to be the aggressors of a conflict, so that he could justify what he wanted to do. So he waited, and when there was an issue with the Spanish throne, Bismarck tried to push forward a German prince for the throne. There was a mistake with the times for the crowning, meaning that Prince Leopold showed up for his crowning to no one there. News quickly spread to the French, who began to get angry that Prussia was trying to force their rule into Spain. Wilhelm II of Prussia didn't agree with Prince Leopold's crowning, and so he made Leopold withdraw his nomination for the throne. This seemed like a big defeat for Bismarck's plans. But Wilhelm then had an issue with Napoleon III, the current leader of France, who is Napoleon's, the big Napoleon, his nephew. Napoleon made a comment towards Wilhelm, stating that although he has taken this Prussian king off of the throne, or attempting to get the throne, he has to make sure that it never happens again. Wilhelm gave this information to Bismarck, who would then give it to German people. But Bismarck used this. he omitted some of the terms used in the talk and made it seem like Napoleon III had insulted Wilhelm. Napoleon III was horrified at this, as he was already in a problematic situation with his monarchy, and so he began the invasion of Prussia. Bismarck used this to his advantage and united with the southern German states and mobilized his forces quicker and with more troops than the French. Using more modern tactics of warfare and a superior manpower, the German forces began to push the French back. After the Battle of Metz, the German forces had managed to force 140,000 men to surrender. The German troops had encircled the final French army. By the next day, 100,000 men and Napoleon III himself had surrendered. The Germans continued their assault and encircled Paris. The Prussian commander Moltke waited for the French to starve, but the King Wilhelm demanded that he bombard Paris to force them to surrender now. The French soon signed an armistice, and they gave Bismarck basically everything he wanted. The treaty of this war was signed in the Palace of Versailles. The treaty forced France to cede land and pay money to Prussia, and most importantly of all, the French had to acknowledge Wilhelm II as the Kaiser of the new German Empire. Bismarck was the first Chancellor of Germany, and he spent the rest of his life building up the German Empire. This would be undone, however, in just under 50 years, when other rulers would take what he had built and ruin it. And that is the formation of the German Empire, well, a simplified version for this series. And now I realise just how many words this series is going to contain. Well, here we go with the second 3 topics for this video: Hitler's family and his childhood. Here we are, finally at Hitler and his life. Well, not yet, we still need to go over his parents, specifically his father, and then we're at Adolf himself. Alois Schicklgruber was born on the 7th of June 1837. His name would later be changed to Alois Hitler. At the age of 36, he married a 50-year-old woman named Anne Glasselhofer. She was a wealthy customs official. Not long after marrying her, Alois began to have an affair with a 19-year-old named Franziska Metzelberger, one of the maids at the lodging he was renting. He could not marry Franziska due to the Roman Catholic law, and so he lawfully separated from Anne. And then on the 13th of January 1882, Alois's first son was born. He was illegitimate due to no marriage between his parents and was named Alois Matzelsberger. Alois stayed with Franziska until his wife Anne died from sickness on the 6th of April 1883. Only a month later, on the 22nd of May, he married Franziska, and when she was 23, she gave birth to Alois' second child, Angela Hitler. By this time, Franziska had developed a lung disorder and was moved to a small village near the town of Brno. He employed his cousin, Clara Hitler, to take care of his wife. Matzelsberger later died on the 10th of August 1884. Clara soon got pregnant by Alois. He was not legally allowed to marry her, though, due to their relation as first or second cousins. But Alois submitted an appeal to the church, and on the 7th of January 1885 they were married on the top floor of Alois's rented home. 5 months later, Clara gave birth to her first child, Gustav. A year later she gave birth to a second child, a daughter named Ida. By 1888, however, they had both died. On the 20th of April 1889, Clara gave birth to Adolf. Adolf was ill as a child, and his mother constantly worried about him and gave him attention. His father, however, was 51 by this point and didn't really care for children. Alois and Clara had another child, Edmund, who later died on the 2nd of February 1900. According to some, after Edmund's death, the young Adolf had a change of mind. His grades began to slip, and he would spend nights near the cemetery that his brother was buried at. During his youth, Adolf was taken by Alois to seek a career in civil service. Adolf, however, didn't particularly like his father, so he basically did the opposite of whatever he wanted him to do. Being born in the Austrian Empire, Alois was very Austrian in his views and patriotism. Adolf, doing the opposite, had a more German view of things. Alois would often beat his children, especially Adolf, for his blatant opposition to his father's views. And, as if in Adolf's favour, Alois Hitler died in 1903, so I'm sure that made him happy somewhat. In 1905, Adolf passed a repeat final exam and left school without any further educational ambition or any career plans. In 1907, Adolf left his family to study art in Vienna. He applied for admission for the Academy of Fine Arts in Vienna, but was rejected twice. The director of the academy suggested that Adolf should apply to the school for architecture. However, he lacked the necessary grading to do so because he had left secondary school for art. Later in the same year, on the 21st of December 1907, his mother, Clara, died from breast cancer. The family doctor, Eduard Bloch, was a Jewish doctor and had this to say about Adolf's reaction to his mother's death. "In all my career, I never saw anyone so prostrate with grief as Adolf Hitler." This is off topic to the current time period we're on, but I think it is worth a mention. In 1937, the Führer Adolf Hitler made an inquiry to find if Dr. Bloch was still alive. Hitler called him a noble Jew and allowed his family a safe future. And not even a lie, his family was not sent to a gas chamber, but the Bronx in New York. I just found that quite interesting. Back to Hitler. It's a strange sentence. After his mother's death, he ran out of money and lived in a homeless shelter. He earned money as a casual labourer and sold small paintworks made by himself. Historians believe that it is in Vienna that he experienced the first of many contacts with racism. German nationalism spread through the area of which he lived. The true origins of Hitler's anti-Semitic views are debated, although most now agree that it was a mixture of his experiences in Vienna and the defeat of Germany in the First World War. Later, in May of 1913, Hitler received the final part of his father's estate and moved to Munich in the German Empire. He was conscripted into the Austro-Hungarian Empire, and on the 5th of February 1914, before the First World War broke out, he had a medical assessment. He was deemed unfit for service, and he was forced to return to Munich. It should be noted that Hitler later claimed that he never wanted to serve the Habsburg Empire because of the mixture of races in the rankings of the army, and his belief that Austria-Hungary was to collapse soon. Now, Austria-Hungary was not Austria-Hungary. It was more Austria, Bosnians, Serbs, Czechs, Slovaks, Ruthenians. There was many ethnicities in this empire, and it was fracturing at each ethnic border. Now, we're almost at the First World War, but first, in August 1914, just as World War I was breaking out, Hitler was living in Munich and volunteered for the Bavarian army. But it has to be stated that according to a report conducted by Bavarian authorities in 1924, Hitler never should have been able to serve in this army due to his Austrian citizenship. He should have been sent back to Austria. But there you go. I guess if he hadn't joined the Bavarian army, things would be a lot different now. It's one of the many strange things here which could really be looked into. Now, here we are with Hitler joining the First World War. Topic 3 out of 3 for this video. You ready? Let's go. The war was the ultimatum of the unstable Balkan region of Europe and several years' worth of tension. To put it simply, Austria-Hungary was mad at Serbia for possibly having something to do with the assassination of the king's nephew by a young Bosnian Serb named Gavrilo Princip. So they sent an ultimatum to Serbia. Germany stated that they would support any of Austria-Hungary's actions. That's important. Serbia refused the ultimatum, and so Austria-Hungary declared war on Serbia. Now Europe looks like this, with the Entente against the Central Powers. And I will do a series on both the First and Second World Wars, respectively, at a later date. The stage was set for the greatest conflict in history at this point, and Hitler was on his way to the fight. He was present at some of the most famous and awful battles of the First World War. These include the First Battle of Ypres, the Battle of the Somme, the Battle of Arras, and the Battle of Passchendaele. He was wounded at Somme in 1916 and was hospitalised for 2 months at Belitz. He returned to the front and was later blinded by a mustard gas attack on the 15th of October 1918. He was hospitalised in Pasewalk, and when he recovered, he learnt of Germany's defeat and subsequent surrender at the hands of the Entente. Hitler achieved awards through his combat experience. He received the Iron Cross Second Class in 1914, and then the Iron Cross First Class in 1918. He would later account his experience in the First World War as the greatest of all experiences. His commanding officers praised him for his bravery on the field. He also received the Black Wound Badge on the 18th of May 1918. At the German surrender, the Treaty of Versailles was signed. It demanded from the Germans the loss of territory in the east, the west and the north, the demilitarization of the Rhineland, the loss of an air force and a navy, and they were forced to have an army of no more than 100,000 men for defence purposes only, and they had to pay the Allies a huge sum of reparations for all damages. This treaty essentially stated that Germany started the war and were to blame for everything caused by it. This left many Germans angry and frustrated with their government's surrender. After the abdication of Kaiser Wilhelm II, yeah, he's still around, many Germans saw the loss of this war not because of Germany's loss in the field, it was because they had been betrayed by the home front civilian leaders like Jews and Marxists that had signed the armistice to end the fighting. This war had left Germany in a state of ruin, and its allies were broken. The Treaty of Versailles would be one of the main key elements to Hitler's rise to power in the 20s and early 30s. In the next episode, I will cover Hitler's rise to power and his consolidation of that power. Thank you for listening or watching, and make sure that you subscribe to see when I next upload. Thank you again, and I'll see you in the next video.